Hello and welcome to the first episode of GiGlee Magazine. This is Shanaya Wagh. I am the owner and founder and the editor of GiGlee Magazine. So it's been me all along on all social media channels, and this is the first time I am recording myself, like visually. I have done a podcast before, but that's just me reading out what I've written for myself. This time it's an extempore, and it will be fun because as you can see, I'm recording what I'm talking to you, and I'm also recording myself visually. So welcome to the first episode of GiGlee Magazine Podcast, and this time we'll be talking about Stirling Castle. So as you know, I have written about Stirling Castle before, but this time for Stirling Castle, we will be talking about some 4 really fascinating and fantastic stories about this castle. And Stirling Castle is really old. It's almost 900 years old. It's going back all the way to the 12th century. And so in this 900-year-old history, there has got to be some stories which bring out the essence of this castle. And you'll find all varieties of emotions mixed in these stories, right from humor, tragedy, murder, if you are into the murder and crime, which I love. And there is some horror stories as well, because how do you find a Scottish castle without ghosts, right? So this week we'll be discussing 4 stories which I felt bring out the history of Scottish castle without actually going back and talking about the history. And then there will be 5, I'll be asking you 5 questions about historical monuments and history in general. And I'll be putting these up on my social networks as well. And it's like a quiz, so you get them right and you get a shout out. And then we will be talking about something new I have learned about history. With that, then we will have a Q&A, which is a question I found on the internet or something that you can ask me for the next podcast that I will be talking about, just some conversation. But first, let's get to the topic at hand. That's the main topic. Stirling Castle. So the 4 stories. Let's begin with the first story, which has to be told. That's the horror story. So can you really find a Scottish castle without its ghosts? And Stirling Castle in its 900 years does have some really funny ghosts. 3 to be exact. So the first ghost I should talk about is the one I like. I don't generally like ghosts, but this one is called the Highland Man. So apparently this ghost is dressed up in his kilt, that the skirt that the Scottish people wear, and he's got his whole Highland uniform, and he looks like a tour guide. So when you approach him to ask him a question about the castle, he rudely turns away apparently and just walks off and disappears right in front of your eyes. Wow, but this is a ghost I like, because he's like, live and let live. You don't come too close to me, like don't approach me, I don't approach you. That's amazing, right? But the next ghost is not so great. It's the Green Lady. Now, Green Lady, not green with jealousy or envy. She's just supposedly green, and she's not as well dressed as her Highlander friend. Her hair is in a mess, her face is a mess, and her story is really tragic. So this Green Lady was apparently a lady's maid, or she was a lady in waiting for Queen Mary of Scots, the famous Queen of Scotland. And so when Queen Mary of Scots was living in Stirling Castle, one of her candles actually set ablaze her chamber, and her bed caught fire. The Queen's bed caught fire, and the Queen was resting in the bed at that time. And her lady in waiting, or her maid, whoever she was, came running, this Green Lady, and saved Queen Mary. But unfortunately, she died herself, saving the Queen. And she never really realized apparently that she's dead, and she keeps roaming the castle searching for her queen. Now that's kind of an irony, seeing that the next ghost is our Pink Lady, who people claim to look same as Mary Queen of Scots. Now, why don't the Pink and Green Lady just meet, understand that they are together, and live happily in peace? I mean, the Green Lady is really loyal, and so does it seem to be the Pink Lady, who really doesn't want to leave without her lady in waiting. Don't know about these ghosts and what they do at night. I hope they meet and they realize. But then we just lose two ghosts from our beloved Stirling Castle. That's about the ghosts. The next story is something even somber. It's a murder. Well, I love murder. But this murder is really interesting. It's about Sir William Douglas. He was the Earl, okay, and his family was not really in the good books of the royal family, especially James II of Scotland. So James II of Scotland called Douglas over for dinner, and the king really suspected that Douglas was hatching a plan to overthrow him. But he called him for dinner, and the two had dinner. And post dining, they went to a private chamber to discuss some matters. And suddenly, the king was heard saying, "False traitor! If you will not, I shall. False traitor! If you will not, I shall." And then the king stabbed Douglas twice. I think that would have kind of finished him off. But if that was not enough, you'll find 3-4 of the courtiers helped King James II finish off Sir William Douglas. And these were the people who helped him off. Let me get their names right. It was Sir Patrick Grey, Sir Alexander Boyd, Stewart of Darnley. They were involved, and they finished off the king's work, and they threw the body outside the window. So today, if you go to Stirling Castle, you'll find a small memorial for Sir William Douglas. So they made a small memorial with flowers and such, where the place where his body was found. That's as far as gruesome murders go. There are some more murders, but this one was by the king, so it's fascinating. So I've added that in. Next one, let's talk about something funny, since we have gone about with ghosts and murders. So this one is about an alchemist. Now in 1507, that's the 16th century, the king still had an alchemist. So this line between science and myth was very blurred at that time. So alchemist was like a thing in the court, and this alchemist was John Damien. He was in the king's confidence, and he worked at Stirling Castle. And then I think it was something like he lost favor with the king, or he just lost his popularity as time went by. And he told the king, "I would like to fly to France. I'll show you how to fly to France." And Sir Damien Grey made this thing with, he told the king, "I will fly to France by myself, wearing feathers." Now you must know that in the 16th century, there wasn't an aeroplane, there was no hot air balloon, and France was across the English Channel. It's a long way from Edinburgh or Stirling. Stirling is close to Edinburgh, but still. And he told the king he's going to do that. The king believed him because, whoa, he's an alchemist, he's got to know what he's up to. So he wore feathers, I think they were bird feathers, and he stood on the walls of the Stirling Castle, all ready to take flight. There was a huge attendance of people, all eagerly waiting, like, oh my god, he's flying, like, with feathers. And he leaped from the wall. And you must know, Stirling Castle is located on a tall, like, it's on a hill, okay, so if you fall, like, you do fall. And he jumped from the castle walls, and guess where he landed? He landed in a dunghill. What's a dunghill? It's garbage. It's basically a sewage or a garbage sort of outlet that comes from a castle, and he landed there. And the funniest part is he survived. The dunghill broke his fall, and he survived. I don't know what he felt. Like, should I just die here from embarrassment, or like, did I just jump and was he scared? I don't know what he felt. But he certainly didn't go to France, and he landed right there in Stirling, right below the castle walls. Okay. I find that story funny every single time. I don't know why, but it's funny. But you have to applaud him for his imagination and his initiative. I mean, it takes guts to tell the king, "I'm going to fly all the way over to France wearing feathers." But that's something, right? So since you've had a nice laugh, let's move on to the final tale of Stirling Castle. That's the werewolf. What's the werewolf, you ask me? So we were currently in the 16th century. Now let's go back further in time to 1304. And if you remember to that opening scene of Outlaw King, the Netflix movie, where they show this big, huge catapult and so many Scottish lords and their people and the King of England, and he hurls the projectile, the big catapult hurls the projectile on the Stirling Castle. Now that actually happened. It was not something that was in myth, but I don't know if it played out exactly the way they've shown it. But that catapult you see is actually a trebuchet, and a trebuchet is a siege kind of an instrument that breaks the castle. It's used in a siege. In history, in the 14th century, the early 14th century, late 13th century, England and Scotland were at war, and those are the periods called as the Scottish Wars of Independence. And Edward the First, he's called the Hammer of the Scots. He had influence over Scotland, and Stirling was the only castle that was standing, and he really wanted Stirling. So he came over to Stirling. He laid a siege, and this siege lasted for 3 whole months. And the castle at that time was held by Sir William Oliphant and 25 men of his. So in those 3 months, he probably understood that there was something going on when the siege was set. What Edward I had done was he had asked his son to go and collect iron from all the rooftops of every church that he could find. So what was this iron meant for? And he used the wood that was found around, and he built this huge trebuchet, a huge catapult, and he brought in Greek fire. Greek fire actually is a fire which never extinguishes. It keeps burning. It was very much used previously, but in the centuries that have passed since, we have lost the recipe to exactly what Greek fire was, but it is known that it would never extinguish. So he brought in Greek fire, the iron which would burn, and he made projectiles and this big catapult that was a trebuchet. And Edward I proudly called this trebuchet the War Wolf, and it was surely going to defeat Stirling Castle, come what may. Understanding this, inside the castle, Sir William Oliphant surrendered. But Edward I was stubborn. He said, "Oh no, you cannot surrender. This is my time, and this is how I'm going to use my toy." And he did fire his trebuchet on Stirling Castle, and I'm sure that the castle actually suffered huge damages then. That was actually one of the most famous stories that has taken place in the history of Stirling Castle, because when he refused to stop and not bombard the castle with his werewolf, he actually decided to make it a kind of an event. So he set up tents for people to sit and actually watch him fire the werewolf on the Stirling Castle and break it apart. It was a big event, apparently. That were my 4 stories. Which story did you find the most fascinating? You liked John Damien, the alchemist, jumping from the roof? You liked the ghosts? Which ghost did you like? Did you like the werewolf, or did you like the murder? Interesting. Which one? You can comment it below. That leads us to the next segment, the questions, the quizzes, the 5 questions. I will be just asking you these questions here. You can DM me the answer on Instagram, just message me the answer there, or you could email it to me at editor@giggly.in, which is editor @gigglee.in. So let me ask you the questions. The first question: in which city is a 1,600-year-old rust-free iron pillar located? The second question: which landscaper was appointed by the French king Louis XIV to create the gardens at the Palace of Versailles? The third question: what's the color of the Eiffel Tower currently? The fourth question: Who was the first reigning monarch to officially live in the Buckingham Palace? And the fifth question, which I find the most fascinating, can you list all 7 wonders of the world? Now, these 5 questions, don't worry if you didn't get them, I will put them in my Instagram stories, and then after 24 hours they'll be available in the highlights. I will put them up as a post on Facebook and as well as on a short video on TikTok. You'll find them. I'm on TikTok as well, by the way. And those are the questions. You can answer them on Facebook, Instagram. And if you get them all correct, no cheating. You can't look on the internet. Don't do that. No cheating. If you find the answers to all of them and you get them right, you'll get a shout out on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So I hope you get them right. They're not very easy, I know that, but I mean, it's fun. I want to see how many people get the 7 wonders of the world right. And I'm talking about the current wonders. I myself always jumble up 1 or 2 of them. So that's that. That leads us to the next segment, which this is a question answer segment. And I found out this question on Quora, asked by Kaustubh Shintre. And I like this question, it's very interesting. He asks, is it possible that all the major events in history were because of time travel? What do you think? Do you think major events in history have happened because of time travel? Like, my first question is, where do you travel? Like, do you travel in the future or do you travel in the past? First case scenario, you travel from the past to the future to understand what the repercussions of this event is, and then you go back in time and you change it and make it into a different event. Or is it that from the future you go back to the past and you change it and you go ahead back in time, maybe future, back to the future? First case scenario, it will be difficult, it will be tedious. Like, you can't keep going to the future for every event that's taking place and seeing its repercussions coming back and then changing it. And it's kind of inconvenient if you think about it. And traveling back in time, the first rule, the 101 that you have in every sci-fi novel is that you cannot go back in time and change anything that has happened in history, because it changes the present. And it could sort of be like, you can't really go back and decide, okay, I don't want the British to invade India, so I'm going back and I'm going to change the small events. I mean, they did divide and conquer, so it was not like one huge war against India, but it was small wars, and which led them to take over the entire subcontinent. So do you go back and stop every single war? And if that happens and you come back to the present, there will be so many people that you will find. It will be like the Avengers, the blip which happens when Thanos goes and people just get wiped off. But probably India will be so different, people will be different, you might not exist because cross-cultural marriages and people and stuff like that. I mean, it's tough to imagine. It will be completely different. So I don't advise people to go back in time and change, but he's not asked for advice. Like, do you think it's possible? No, I don't think it's possible that major events have happened, because there's no way to actually define a major event. Major events are small cumulative events that have led to this major event. That was my answer to that question. But I'd like to know what you think. I mean, you can either just you can make a video on this, answering this question, or you can just send me an audio clip, or you can write it down. Again, you can DM that to me on Instagram, where it is GiGlee Magazine, or you can email it to me at editor@giggly.in. And the last segment was something new I found out this week about history, about feeding the brain, So the thing I was going to talk about was, I'm a commerce student and we have economics as a subject. And in economics, you have the monetary policy and the fiscal policy set by the central bank and the government. These two are separate policies. And you'll often find people getting confused which is what, like which is monetary and which is fiscal. So I found this out in a book I was reading. I don't know whether it was my textbook or some other non-fiction, which actually gave me the meaning of the word fiscal. Now, fiscal comes from the word fisc, and fisc is a word in Roman history which actually means, this is what it means. Okay, 1 minute. It means it's a fisc was actually a public treasury of Rome, or it is also the emperor's privy purse. Now, the privy purse of the emperor basically means the government today. So, the best way to remember fiscal is from the word fisc, which means the emperor's or the king's privy purse. So, obviously, the fiscal policy is going to be set by the government and the monetary policy by the central bank. That's a nice way to remember, don't you think so? Well, that leads us to the end of our podcast and our video series. I hope you enjoyed watching this. I would love to know what you thought about it. There's a lot for you to answer. I mean, come on, what's your favorite story? What are the answers to the quizzes? If you want to shout out, please don't cheat. And what you thought about this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you liked listening to it, give it a heart. And I will see you next Friday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the week ahead. If you have a question that you want me to address, please send it to me again on editor@giggly.in, or you can message me on Instagram. And you can find GiGlee Magazine throughout the week on 3 social media platforms. On TikTok, it's a new account, so please go and give it a follow there. It is GiGlee Magazine. On Instagram and on Facebook, all 3 places, it's GiGlee Magazine. You'll find the bright yellow logo right there. And have a great week. Bye bye.